All right, welcome everyone. I hope everyone's having a beautiful, wonderful day. Definitely beautiful outside, a little cool here in Clark County. Uh, it is my honor to introduce to you our Deputy Commissioner of Education, our first Chief Equity Officer, and also a former superintendent. From Colorado, I believe. So at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Letitia, and everyone who's on today. I'm looking forward to engaging in a nice conversation over the next 45 or 50 minutes. And it feels great to be a retired superintendent and doing the great work at the Kentucky Department of Education. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'll share my screen. Okay, Andy, are you seeing the screen?
Not yet, sir.
Okay. Presentation mode, and you should see the screen now.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Here at KDE, we began with the notion that context matter. So I want to make sure that we are interactive doing this, and I need a volunteer, and maybe I have to volunteer Andy. Andy, would you read the first paragraph here?
We have retained a vision of what is possible when we build classrooms and schools and systems around the students' brilliance, cultural wealth, and intellectual potential, rather than self-serving savior narratives that have us fixing and filling academic gaps. Using student funds of knowledge to better understand what has shaped them will help us in a number of ways. It allows us to know our students better. It offers social and emotional learning, which we know is vital to learning for students. And it is trauma informed. It also gives us qualitative, phenomenological data that places the lived experiences of our students and their families as a priority.
And Andy, you nailed phenomenological, first time out. So A+ for you today. We try to put context over content. We look at the strengths and the brilliance that our students bring to the classroom before we look at how we need to go about fixing and filling the academic needs of kids. So thank you for that. And I want to give you the citation for this book. We've taken that quote from page 4 of a book called Street Data. It's a book that we're using here at the Kentucky Department of Education to further our understanding of equity, pedagogy, and school transformation. And also, I would like for our participants to put any questions or concerns or input into the chat box, or feel free to mute yourself as well. Also, I want to talk a little bit about achievement gap versus opportunity gap. It's one of the perfect examples of looking at context over content. When we look strictly at the achievement gap, and we do a lot of talking about that, we unfairly place blame on kids. And it implies that children are not achieving as they should be, and it's their fault that they're not achieving when they don't hit a proficiency score on a certain achievement test or some high stakes test. Whereas the opportunity gap draws attention to the conditions and obstacles that young students face throughout their educational careers, because we know students don't come to school at the same place. We know some students come to school with issues that the school district doesn't have anything to do with, that the school district is not aware of. And so we know, again, students come to school with challenges. Therefore, it's accurate for us to place responsibility on an inequitable system. And it's also our job, I should add, for us to fix that system, a system especially that's not providing the opportunities for all kids to thrive and to succeed. One of the things we had talked about during our preparation for this presentation, I had a great conversation with Andy and Letitia about this, and it was coming up with some standard language, especially around the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so here are some examples, and I'm not going to read through all these slides because I really want this to be a conversation, and it's one of the downsides of this pandemic period we're in and using technology to come together. There are a lot of great things. I mean, I could broadcast this from KDE or anywhere in the country, and we can bring people anywhere in, and you can be an active participant. But we don't have that one-on-one connection and that presentation style where we're talking. So I have these slides here for you, for your own reference, and we're going to make these slides available for you. But when we look at diversity, we're looking at individual differences, whether it's personality styles, learning styles, and experiences, as well as group differences, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, gender orientation. And so what you'll find here at the Kentucky Department of Education, and a definition that we're trying to really share universally across the Commonwealth, is that diversity goes beyond gender. It goes beyond the term race we use or ethnicity. It's a huge umbrella term that really captures all of these types of things, because each student brings his or her own set of diverse needs, own set of diverse qualities and traits. So again, at your Kentucky Department of Education, diversity is a huge umbrella term. And what we've borrowed from Verna Myers from the book from Moving Diversity Forward is this analogy of diversity. It's like being invited to the dance party. So when someone asks you about what is diversity, it's like thinking back to your middle school dance. You know, typically the boys on one side of the gym, the girls on the other side of the gym. But it's being invited to this dance. So let's move on to some next areas here, more definitions here in regards to equity. And what we continue to talk about here at KDE, as opposed when we talk about equity, is that it's not about demonizing people because of their race or indoctrinating students. You've heard quite a bit about that. You know, equity is the code word for racism. I've been here now with the Kentucky Department of Education for almost a year. And one of the first things I heard from a national leader, not only a state leader here in Kentucky, but a national leader. And what he said was, he said, equity is just a code word for racism. It couldn't be anything further from the truth. We have a very comprehensive definition or description of equity that our very own Commissioner Glass has put together. This definition is something that Dr. Glass believes in, as well as your Kentucky Board of Education. And if you'll allow me to indulge, I'll read this definition to you. Equity in education is fundamentally an effort to ensure that all of our students have the supports they need to meet our academic standards and to reach their full potential as students, citizens, and human beings. An equity focus in education recognizes that public school students come to us with a variety of backgrounds, needs, supports, and experiences, and that we must take those into account when we consider the education of each child, the education of each of our 650 plus thousand public school kids here in Kentucky. And again, that's one of the more comprehensive and more understandable definitions of equity that I've seen. And again, we certainly thank Commissioner Glass for that. But when you look at equity, It's been around for a long time. It's been around forever. One of the first stabs at equity, obviously, was desegregating schools in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. And then about 20 years later, 19, 20 years later, we had Public Law 94-142. And that ensured that every student, regardless of his or her abilities, had access to a free and appropriate public education, IDA. And so when people talk about equity, it's not new, it's been around forever. And it's not about demonizing people or indoctrinating them because of race. 94-142, again, didn't even talk about race, talked about all students, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, all those terms that fit under this umbrella of diversity that we're using here in the Commonwealth. So let's move on. And our third of four terms is inclusion. Inclusion is the intentional act of creating an environment that fosters mutual respect and relationships for all people, regardless, again, of their background, whether it's social, cultural, language spoken, or geographically where they're located. So it doesn't matter, again, and it's being respectful. But it's also, again, using that analogy, it's being asked to dance in the middle school party. Again, so our boys and girls, they show up at the middle school dance, boys on one side of the gym, girls on the other side of the gym, and then finally, a boy or girl ask the other to dance. So now we're moving into inclusion. Let's talk about equality. Equality is the condition under which every student is treated the same way. They're granted the same rights, the same responsibility, regardless of their individual differences, abilities, or background. And what I've heard lately, when you hear these conversations and these debates about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is the only time you'll hear me say this, CRT, critical race theory, and many times folks who are anti-CRT or don't have a full understanding of CRT, they equate that with equality. In Dr. King's dream that one day his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He did say that, but the part that's missing is that Dr. King also said that we should eradicate racism and all the other bad isms in this country so that we can move to the beloved community that the late John Lewis talked about, this perfect community. In order to get to this perfect community, in order to get to equality, we must eradicate racism, sexism, discrimination, and all of that stuff. And so I hope when people equate the work that we're doing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and equality, they consider what Dr. King said, let's eradicate those bad isms like racism and other things that we'll talk about today. Yeah, I want to pause for a second. Again, I really want this to be conversational, and this is how I would present if we were together. Any questions, concerns, Letitia or Andy, any comments in the chat box?
I am monitoring that, and I encourage any participants to add anything as we keep going forward.
Okay, good. And how are we doing with technology? Is everyone able to receive this presentation okay?
Going great, and we're recording, I think. So it should
Okay.
be fun.
Very good. The next part of our discussion is that I want to give you an update on our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that are happening across the Commonwealth in our school district. And I really want to take time, one, to thank our partners with the Kentucky Department of Education, all of our colleagues there that are really making this work really to happen. I want to thank our partners with the Council for Post-Secondary Education, and certainly want to thank our education co-ops. And more importantly, I want to thank our folks at the local school district who educate our public school kids every day in helping this toolkit, these opportunities come to fruition. And I won't spend much time talking about these. Last time I had an opportunity to talk with you all, we talked about equity beginning with high quality academic standards. We're in the process now of revising our standards for science, and certainly want to thank those folks who are helping us with those. endeavors. And what we're doing is ensuring that every student, every staff member across the Commonwealth has access to these high standards. These standards are aligned to your curriculum. The curriculum is aligned to your assessments, should be aligned to your formative assessments, as well as your summative assessments, your end of course exams, your state exams. So ensuring that our standards are aligned to the assessments. Then also, we are underway with a huge pilot project to ensure that more districts across the Commonwealth have access to high quality instructional resources, resources that take in consideration our students' different backgrounds, those backgrounds that I've talked about earlier, that are aligned to the standards, and that teachers have access to these resources. So again, we appreciate the 15 or so districts that are participating in our high quality instructional resources pilot project. And we really would like to see this across the state. And we certainly recognize our local school districts in your creation of high quality curriculum as well. Now we'll spend a little bit more time discussing our equity dashboard, a little bit about our playbook and the A4 modules and Kate as well. I'll start first with our equity playbook. We do have an RFP that's out there, and we're looking for proposals for us to create our playbook. You'll see in our dashboard will point out to those opportunity gaps that are there. And so we'll have real time, real access to that data, and we can see those gaps even before those gaps really become detrimental to our students. And so that's one of the things I really love about the dashboard. So it gives us a warning signal that gaps are gaps are happening. With our playbook, we'll have not only standards based proven practices to close these opportunity gaps, but we'll have our folks with the educational co-op, and I'll talk more about that, working with our local school districts and our schools to help close those gaps using research-based strategies. And then the A4 modules, I'll talk more about that a little later. We had that kickoff last week, and it was a great opportunity for all of our folks together to come together to look at how we can ensure that some of the obstacles we've had in place relative to implicit bias and other types of things don't seep into our instruction. Then we've talked quite a bit about the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. And again, huge kudos to those 10 districts that are devising plans to grow your own staff. And so we're happy about that. And again, congratulations on those 10 districts that received the $50,000 for their Grow Their Own project. Then of course, all of this is wrapped around a multi-tiered system of supports. So that is huge to as we continue to create our Kentucky Equity Toolkit.
You have a couple of questions, sir.
Sure.
The first one
Absolutely.
is, how are Kentucky teachers being invited in to curate the equity playbook? And then I had a question yesterday from a participant in another event about this, which is, how are students going to be represented in equity work?
Outstanding. So let's start with, while we're in this business, with our students. We have relied heavily, as we talk about equity, from my first day here on October 31st of 2020, on the input of our students and our student voices. And again, that was one of my main calling cards in coming to Kentucky, because this is a place that really respects our students, a place that respects our staff and their voices. And we'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to get better. And I know that's a mantra of our Kentucky Board of Education and Commissioner Glass. We have approximately 17 students who represent us, who represent the geographical regions in Kentucky on the Commissioner's Student Advisory Board. And one of the first things we began to tackle when I arrived was issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was not something that we indoctrinated students on. This was something that our students really wanted to share. And they spent almost all of last year really looking at how students can have a greater presence in addressing those issues. They put together a very, very solid video, a very impressive video on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's on our website. If you haven't seen it, please do so. We are excited about some other activities that our students are getting involved in. And so from the beginning, this has been a grassroots effort, and it certainly has involved our students. In regards to our staff, I've worked closely with Commissioner Glass's Teacher Advisory Committee, Principal Advisory Committee, and we've gotten feedback from them. If you've not filled out the equity scan that went out almost a year ago, it'll be a year in November, asking each resident in Kentucky to let us know what's going strong or what's going right in your school districts relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what are some areas that we needed to improve, and to give us some suggestions that we could model across the Commonwealth. So please, please go to our Kentucky Department of Education website and complete that survey as well. We do have staff members, and I'll talk more about this. And I know I have Dr. Damian Sweeney on, who is our new Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the agency. And I may call on him any minute now, sometimes within the next 40, 45 minutes during our talk together. But we have representation on our committees, and our next step would be to create a statewide committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're trying to hear as many voices as we possibly can. We're trying to model that. We're not only saying that this is important, Letitia, but we're saying that we need to model this. Okay, and what was the second question? And I do apologize for the long answer, but it's the most important work that we do.
I think you got both of them. It was about students and teachers representation. So it looks like there's another one. How are those advisory committees diverse in terms of intersectionality of identities?
Oh, absolutely. We're trying, when we say diversity goes beyond the amount of melanin in the skin and skin color, we mean it. We model it. And when you go back and you look at our definition of what diversity is, we're following that definition, and we're staying true to it. Whenever we look for voices, we look for representation, we're modeling that. Absolutely. But again, the thing that's going to really make this work here in Kentucky and is that, one, bringing everyone in the village together, that's important. But also being courageous enough to say, hey, there is a race or an ethnicity gap here, and being brave enough to take that on. And we're not opposed to that. Or there's a gender gap here, being brave enough, we're going to take that on. And we've done that. We've done that in our school systems. And we're going to continue to do this work here at the Kentucky Department of Education, being brave enough to recognize this. And all this is really captured in our Kentucky Board of Education's resolution that was passed in July a year ago and reaffirmed this year in October. And so it's part of what we are. You'll find it as a part of our strategic plan. But again, for all of this to work, we need to have a multi-prevention system that we call the Kentucky Multi-Tiered System of Support, KYMTSS. And in short, this support not only looks at students' academic needs, and I'm also going to say staff academic needs as well, and I'll get to that point as well. It not only considers a prevention of the academic and prevention system, but also it looks at the social, emotional, and behavioral competencies that students need to be successful. And in order to really help students to succeed, it gets back to this whole notion of the whole child. It has to be a focus on the student's academic needs, but it also has to be a focus on a student's social and emotional needs. And that's probably the most important characteristic of the Kentucky MTSS system. And lastly, it's equitable, and it pays attention to, it recognizes individual learning needs of each and every student. That's the most powerful thing about our MTSS system. And it's a statewide framework, and we're continuing to model this framework. We're continuing to ensure that this framework is in each school district here in Kentucky. And this work gets to transformative SEL, social and emotional learning. And what I like about transformative social and emotional learning, it looks at a process whereby young people and adults, students and staff build strong, respectful, and lasting relationships. And we look at the causes. Again, when I talked about being fearless and talked about being brave. We are not afraid to look at some of the causes that cause inequity. It could be poverty. We know poverty impacts the lives of students from all different backgrounds, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their language spoken at home. And so we come together to create some solutions to lead to greater personal, community, and societal well-beings of all of our students. Because if we take care of our students, we take care of those things happening in our schools, in our high schools, and even in higher ed, we take care of things that are happening in society and Kentucky is better off. And there's a ton of research out there that shows that school districts that pay attention to SEL, the students have greater agency and greater outcomes. They are less truant, they do better academically, and they do better socially. So again, I'm so proud to have a system in place, a framework in place that's being built, a framework that's in place that's being used with SEL, whether it's the council model, in helping students and staff build greater relationships and agency. In fact, there is a demand for social emotional learning, diversity, and inclusion. I read recently from a council report that district spending on SEL programs in a one-year period grew 45%, from a little under $500 million to nearly $800 billion, $765 million in a one-year period. And as you can imagine, during this period of this pandemic, this has caused a shift from academic achievement and testing. Not to say that those things aren't important, they are important. But I'm so proud of our educators, not only here in Kentucky, but also across this country, that we can pay attention to the academic needs and testing, but our top priority should be addressing students and staff mental health. So in the study that was conducted by Castle, it demonstrated that this is the top priority. And again, I really don't have to even look at that study. When we talked with our students on the student advisory committee, they wanted not so much additional assistance academically, they wanted assistance in terms of how to deal with the social and emotional and mental health well-being. Again, matching this recent study by Castle. Then secondly, improving school diversity, equity, and inclusion was listed as the third priority behind improving students' mental health and promoting students' social and emotional competency. Again, Kentucky is on the cutting edge of where the best practices and where the research is pointing in terms of where school districts and state agencies should be in addressing the needs of our students and staff. Now let's talk a little bit now about our equity toolkit. And I certainly want to thank our folks in the communications department at the Kentucky Department of Education of helping us create this visual. I know a lot of us have said, oh my goodness, we have all of this stuff coming at us. How does this fit together? And I want to give you this display here that shows our A4 modules, our high quality instructional resources, our equity playbook, our equity dashboard, our high quality academic standards, and CATE, and our multi-tiered system of supports, all coming together, all supporting each other. Now let's move on. I think the next part, we'll talk a little bit about the equity dashboard. I know Ann and Letitia, you wanted me to talk about the dashboard and also discuss our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So I'll get to that here shortly. But any other questions before I move to that? Okay, moving on. Hello, I'm Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker, Deputy Commissioner and Chief Equity Officer at the Kentucky Department of Education. I'm extremely proud to introduce you to the Equity Dashboard suite of visualizations, a tool created to support schools and districts as they consider data points through an equity lens. This dashboard will help teams identify groups of students who are at risk of being over or even underrepresented in different areas like chronic absenteeism and advanced coursework using an easy to understand color coded system. The dashboard is designed to offer a big picture look that will help schools and districts identify areas needing further attention. KDE defines equity as the promotion of access, opportunity, and advancement of all individuals, including those in underserved communities, in order to identify and eliminate conditions that prevent the ability of all students to reach their full potential. Assessing school and district equity is about more than just identifying challenges and offering recommendations. It is also about creating an intentional, ambitious, and urgent path forward for Kentucky districts to improve outcomes for all students. When we say all students, it is with the understanding that each student comes to the district together as we walk this path towards equity for all. Okay, that was a little bit about our equity dashboard. And if you want to, you can feel free to, when I send you this presentation or you go and listen to the recording, please send me any questions or other concerns that you have about the dashboard. But if you want to hear my description, I think it's probably 3 minutes in length, a greater description of the dashboard, please contact me and we can send you the clip, or you can feel free to go to our website at KDE and take a full look at the dashboard. Now, again, we're getting there. We did last week, we did talk about this dashboard. It's going to have real live data. We were breaking it down by student subgroups, and some of the things that we talked about were students with disabilities, chronic absenteeism, in-school suspensions, and out-of-school suspensions. A couple beautiful things about this. This one uses your real-time data. When we look at assessment data, it's what I call autopsy data. This is data after the fact. This is real-time data that will give you a warning. I call it our early warning system on student achievement. And these are 4 of the different categories that we have. Your team can then come together, whether it's your school improvement team, whether it's your district improvement team, in collaboration with your leaders from the co-op, can put together a plan of improvement for each student. One of the things that we're working on, and I really appreciate the conversation that I had with Andy and Letitia yesterday, was working with our local school districts and our schools and ensuring that our DEI coordinators at the co-ops, as well as, and some of you have DEI staff as well, and we need to make sure that these staff members have access to the student data on a need to know basis. And I'm sure we can work through that so that we can put together a plan at the current time, as opposed to a year or after the fact when this warning bell goes off. For example, you would have a certain number or disproportionate number of your Pacific Islander students with chronic absenteeism. So what are we going to do to address that? Or you have a disproportionate number of Native American or African American students with in-school or out-of-school suspension. But this also is a component that looks at the academic part as well. It looks at your number of students in your advanced placement courses, the number of students in your IB programs, if you do offer them. So really excited about this real data and the partnerships that we have to address some of these opportunity gaps. Next, I want to show you a quick video on our equity dashboard and guidance. This is a demo in terms of how you as a school district, how you as a team can do an equity walk.
We call this the data equity walk. We think it's important, once again, that we engage in the data. We know that data doesn't tell the complete story. We know that there's context to the data that you see. We want you to go and do a gallery walk and answer some of the questions that you see. Number one, what is the general reaction that you get from the data? How does the data strike. What's the story behind the data? How does this connect to your personal experience? What further information would be helpful, and what solutions do you think can happen to address these issues?
Okay, in that data walk or gallery walk, you heard the term context. I would like for an individual or two to unmute. And I want you to think about this. Again, context matters, context over content. Recently, school districts across the country have received their achievement data, what I call the pandemic achievement data. How are some of you putting those results, especially those districts who've had historically high results? How are you putting that in its proper context when you're talking with your staff and you're talking with your community members and especially your parents about those results? Again, you heard context and you'll hear context again. So would someone unmute and talk about how you're putting even your student test results in context?
Put this in the chat, but if someone wants to speak, I think I have to give them panelist
Oh.
status, but I'm happy to do that. Anybody who wants to, or they can add it in the chat and I can unmute them or add them to panelists. Can you restate the question, Dr. Woodstaker, just to be sure people
Absolutely.
understand? Thank you.
Right. When I introduced the video, the speaker talked about putting data in its proper context. And again, one of the things that we live by at the Kentucky Department of Education is context over content. The example I use with achievement gap versus opportunity gap. And I always speak about the opportunity gap. We have seen an unprecedented number of students not sit for exams because of COVID. We've seen school districts that have historically had really high results on these achievement tests. We've seen their results drop. In schools that have had populations that have historically struggled, they're continuing to struggle, especially those groups mostly impacted by COVID. But yet, we still had to explain to our public our testing results. So how are some of our leaders here? How have you or how are you putting this in its proper context?
We have a participant saying the pandemic and pandemic data has given us some freedom to look within our district at the data that may be impacting students.
Okay, very good. And my last question, and maybe Andy, you or Letitia can answer this. Has this pandemic caused us to look at assessments differently?
Absolutely, from your participants, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think people have really taken a step back and begun to consider what the data is that we're getting and what it's telling us.
Excellent. And On November 1st and 2nd, it will be a great opportunity for those of you who will be present in Louisville for the Kentucky Education Summit that's headed up by Dr. Glass and others at KDE, because we're going to spend the bulk of that time looking at assessments, looking at how we can go about assessing students beyond standardized tests, how we can authentically assess students. And I'm so glad that for us, it didn't take a pandemic to do this. This did not have any bearing on us to have this summit, this statewide summit. And if you and your colleagues have not registered for the summit, I would encourage you, and I'm sure Tony Collins-Tapman, our communications team guru, is going to be a little upset with me, but it'll be a good upset, because if you all have not registered, please register and attend that summit, because we're going to have a deep dive, and we're going to hear from some of the best and brightest minds here in Kentucky, first and foremost, and nationally, about assessment and other things, and how we can take this experience of this assessment and continue to propel our student achievement and staff achievement forward. And how are we doing with time? Are we doing okay with time?
Doing fine. Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. The next thing that I want to talk about with y'all are Kentucky Department of Education, DEI advisory teams. This is our internal team. We have 2 people from each office at the Kentucky Department of Education who will sit on this team. And we're going to meet monthly to offer feedback on our DEI progress and our strategic plan. We do have an active strategic plan in place regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to continue our studies by studying at the Harvard Summer Institute. We don't know whether it will be in person or that's going to be virtual, but we want to make sure that we're learning from others across the country, and we're sharing the great things that are happening in Kentucky. And I may be a bit selfish in saying this, but I'm proud to say this. I think when you look at Kentucky's Equity Toolkit, we have one of the most effective and certainly one of the more comprehensive school toolkits in the country. When you look at that puzzle and everything that's going to go into this toolkit. But at the end of the day, when we measure effectiveness, it'll come down to what we are doing in our school district. Relative to our equity playbook that I talked briefly about, again, it will give us 5 strategies to deal with 5 of the most pressing opportunity gaps in the country when it comes to student achievement. And if we implement those strategies with our DEI coordinators, with the co-ops, we work as a team at the local level, our students are going to show some tremendous progress, because it's one thing, again, to point out the opportunity gaps. It's another thing to have a very cogent plan, a very effective plan in place to address those gaps. So we're really happy about that. And then this Friday, we'll be sending some additional guidance out in KDE for our advisory team in terms of helping us look at DEI across the Commonwealth. So again, really excited about that. So we're not only asking that we do that at KDE, we're also, as you all know, working closely with district DEI officers. There are about 15 district level DEI officers across the Commonwealth. These are folks who have already been employed by some of these districts here. We had a meeting last week. I know Andy was able to attend that meeting as well. And we had representatives from JCPS, Fayette County, McCracken County, Berea, Owensboro, Daviess County, Paducah, Christian County, Union County, Fort Thomas, and Mayfield. Again, these are folks who have been doing this DEI work for years before we started to put this together. And our hopes in working with our staff in the Office of Teaching and Learning and working with Dr. Sweeney is to create this community of practice where these individuals can come together. When I started reaching out to these folks here from the result of my scan in terms of what was happening in regards to DEI across Kentucky, one of the biggest concerns was that our folks were working in silos. And so this helps them come together and form what I just said, a community of practice. We also invited our new coordinators who are working with our education co-ops, our 8 educational co-ops plus our special ed co-ops for a total of 9. We've hired about 4 folks, and I'll talk about those at the next slide. And we're looking forward to welcoming new folks on board. And we came together last week to talk about our work, and what an exciting time, because we're not just doing this in pockets. There are always pockets of greatness happening everywhere. We believe that these pockets of greatness should happen across the Commonwealth. So here are the 9 new DEI coordinators, and at our co-ops plus one we're going to hire at the Kentucky Department of Education's Office of Special Education. And here are some things that our folks will be doing, some initiatives our folks will be doing. We're continuing to work this out. Dr. Sweeney, as the Director of DEI at KDE, will be sending more information out here very shortly. But we're going to meet monthly for professional development to share best practices. We'll create an agenda with some items to talk about. We'll certainly always have time for people to talk about issues that they would like to entertain, that they would like to discuss. And also they'll work with district level leaders, again, coming from the co-ops, to mine data and execute strategic plays to close opportunity gaps. So far, 70 of our 170 school districts signed up for the Equity Playbook, which we're really excited as part of our maiden voyage, and we do have bandwidth to bring on additional people. We are making our training sessions, our PD sessions, we're recording them. We're going to make them available not only to our members of our DEI family, but also to everyone in the Commonwealth who would like to have access to these videos. Those same videos that we're creating through the A4 module, A to the 4th module in cooperation with our partners in higher ed. We've completed 1 video, and then we'll continue with the other series of videos. And we're making those videos, again, available to not only staff, in-service staff, but also our pre-service staff to address issues in better understanding students and staff members' background. So again, excited about that. A couple other things that our coordinators at the co-op will be doing, again, preparing monthly agenda items, bringing new topics up for discussion, and strengthening our community of practice. Okay, any questions about our coordinators, some of the things that they will be doing, as well as our folks at KDE?
You have a question. Is there a newsletter or listserv local equity directors can be involved in to keep up to date?
Love it, love it, love it. That's one of the first things that I talked about when I came to the agency, when it was an office of one, is that how can we create a newsletter to send this out to everyone regarding our activities. And we're in the process of doing that. As soon as we're able to hire a new coordinator of comprehensive school counseling, so that Dr. Sweeney is not doing 2 and 3 jobs, then we'll start immediately on creating our newsletter and getting that information out. And that really, really touches my heart, because we have people here who know how important this work is, and how this work here that we're doing can touch the lives of all students, and not engaging in these divisive, controversial concepts around CRT. So again, thanks for asking that very important question. It's definitely on the way. I wish all these things here we had in our toolbox were complete, but we're getting there, and I'm really happy about the progress. And Letitia, was the newsletter, and what was the second one?
Well, I have a question, and I know you said that there is capacity for more folks to sign up to be in the Equity Playbook work. Where do they find out how to do that?
Well, they will find out as soon as as I said, we have the RFP out there.
Okay.
We'll start interviewing, and we'll select a vendor. And then we'll work with our vendor, and we want our vendor to help lead that. And so as soon as we select a vendor, That's the first question we're going to ask.
Thank you.
So that's forthcoming. Again, these following folks, we have our very own Andy Dotson here. Andy is already representing KEDC. Marcus Jones from SESC, and I think Marcus was with us last week. Dr. Stephen Moats at GREC and Ashley Dubois at NKCES. And OVEC, KVEC, WKEC, and CKEC are all in the process of hiring their diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinators. So we're, excited about bringing that whole team on. And yes, Letitia, we're going to have these videos available as these folks come on, these training videos, these PD videos, to help get them up to speed as they come on board.
And we've got a follow-up question about the vendor and the equity playbook. What's the exact role the vendor is playing in curating and publishing the equity playbook?
Right. If you've had a chance to look at the description, one, this vendor needs to have some experience working with public school districts in creating a strategic plan to address some of the biggest opportunity gaps that exist. And I'll just talk very briefly about this. Some of you have heard me say this before. We know we talk all the time about disproportionality in terms of certain ethnic groups being underrepresented in your really challenging IB courses, AP courses, and disproportionalities in your career and technical education courses, or a disproportionate number of students in a certain group who are being suspended, being expelled. So what experience does that vendor have in creating research-based strategies to help close that? What experience would the vendor have in looking at how we are placing staff in our school districts to meet the challenging needs of our students? What experience would they have with culture and climate, for example, in helping to improve culture and climate? As educators, we know that's the straw that stirs the drink, right behind our highly effective teachers and support staff. Our administrators coming in, establishing a very positive culture and climate. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. And also spending, how are we spending our money? Do we really, and again, I do appreciate our conversation yesterday, that we go back over these terms here, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when we look at spending, we generally say, well, every elementary in the school district, every middle school in the school district, every high school in the school district should get the same amount of money, regardless, and should have the same programs, regardless of the population of students they have. And we call that equality. But we do know that our schools within our school districts are different, just like school district A is different from school district B in the county. And so that's going to be part of our work with our vendors. That's going to be part of the work of our DEI coordinators here. It's to help us look at that and at least help. Now, again, we can't mandate, just like we didn't mandate people sign up to participate in the equity playbook. But what we can do, we can give folks research-based, proven research-based strategies to begin to address those opportunity gaps. So that would be the primary role.
Thank you. And we are at about 5 minutes until the end. I'll again invite anyone who wants to put questions in the chat to do so. And then I want to make sure, Dr. Thomas Woodstecker, that you have the chance to make any closing comments you want to.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll get through this through the next couple minutes. First, we have appropriated an additional $2.8 million towards supporting more access to the arts program, to establish a new Governor Arts campus. Again, we certainly believe in supporting and educating the whole child, just as we talk about our multi-tiered system of supports. We know the importance of arts education. And so we've used an additional federal dollars for that. Here's some of your training that's coming up that I think that not only your school districts are part of KEDC, but I think school districts across the Commonwealth can certainly utilize. In November, we'll have equity for our LGBTQIA students. Again, this is about helping our students to feel comfortable at school. This is about helping staff members. I don't know everything about the LGBTQIA community, but I'm willing to learn to ensure that more students feel comfortable at school and that we don't have another student in that community committing suicide because they're not feeling supported. December, we'll have equity and social and emotional learning. We'll go, KEDC will go deeper in that. And in January, equity and economics. And then back in February, equity and special education students and equity and gifted students. So again, kudos to KEDC for your very powerful, your upcoming very powerful education and equity series. So in the last couple minutes here, I'm often asked this question: how can we inform our school communities about these initiatives, folks? This is one of the most important jobs we have here, because if we just can't do this alone, we cannot push these initiatives along. We need to invite everybody under the tent, everybody in the village, all villagers here to take part in helping these initiatives along. So we can educate through presentations and guidance, and we need to listen. I think Commissioner Glass modeled that through his listening tours in each of our co-op regions, and also having listening tours in Spanish, in language other than English, and provided opportunities to hear from our partners and to challenge us and to have it in a decent way and to have conversations and to say we're in this together. And again, what wraps all this together is our multi-tiered system of support, making that a key ingredient of that and implementing that with fidelity. And then telling our stories, because folks, if we don't tell our stories, who else would tell them? They may tell them, but they're not going to tell them the way they should be. I have a 90-second video that I want to end with before I make some 30 seconds of closing remarks here. So let me see if I can share the sound here. And it's really about diversity, equity, and inclusion not being a destination. It's a journey. Now, this fellow here is going to talk about racial discrimination and racial disparities, but you can plug anything, whether it's gender, ethnicity, language spoken at home, into his speech. Really, you could. So let's see if we can do that. Letitia, did you get the
One is
sound?
not racist doesn't actually connote any action. You know, I think what's even more analogous to think about, if you think about, let's pick baseball, right? You take baseball, to be not racist is going for a bunt. You know, you hold the bat out, the ball, you hope the ball hits the bat. You're not expecting to hit the ball hard. You just want to get the ball to connect with the bat so that you can do the best you can to attempt to make a play. To be anti-racist is to swing the bat as hard as you can and go for the home run, right? To put in the extra effort to shoot for the stars and to actually swing that bat, right? To risk the strike, right? But you swing the bat as hard as you can every single time, right? Because you understand that that's the way you win games. That's the way you change things. And I think bunts still count as a hit, but is it an actual swing? No. And I think people who say they're not racist, they're just going for the hit. I just want to make sure that I got a hit on my record. As long as I say I'm not racist, I feel like I can absolve myself of any shame and guilt without actually having to do any work or sacrifice anything. But we all know that love doesn't come without sacrifice or risk. Anti-racist is connected to love.
Okay, very good. Okay, Andy, do you see the final screenshot here?
All I have is us and the KEDC slide, so I don't see anything else.
Well, that's good, because the last slide was, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you as we maneuvered the technology here. I certainly didn't want to spend this time here not giving you some things that you could need, and certainly didn't want to spend this time walking through a slideshow, but I wanted to give you some different perspectives. And the last 30 seconds here relative to that last piece, the DEI is not a destination. It is a journey, and we could pull out any one of those items, as I said earlier, and plug in there. I mean, this is hard work, and you will be questioned. You will be attacked. I mean, we've been in education long enough, and it's always happened. But I believe this work here, I know this work here is worth it. People before us have taken on even more difficult challenges, and it's our time. We're at bat now, to use the metaphor earlier. We're at bat now to hit a home run for our public school kids here in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I thank you for the work that you do each and every day.
Thank you, Dr. Woods Tucker. Again, I think this presentation is about highlighting awareness and bringing about change in our Commonwealth. Look forward to the work as we move forward. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate your attendance, and we'll make sure this information is put online. Thank you again, Dr. Woods Tucker.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.